Rather than assuming that everyone's really dumb and they've got it wrong, try to understand their position. Then what's the strongest argument that the other side has to support their position? And that's what causes issues and fighting and tribalism and my sheikh's a lion, and the Imam's going to say all of the scholars have said this, all of the scholars have said it has to be a fist length, and that's it. So the kid's going to be thinking, they're not stupid, people aren't stupid, every Wahabi will get.
Another question, I just wanted to know, can we call them wobblers or no?
Yeah, of course you can.
You can?
Yeah, why not?
Alright.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of the Optimized Muslim podcast. So starting the topic for today is how to disagree effectively. I think we'll all agree that this is definitely a topic that we as Muslims need to think more deeply about, because we see all of the disagreements out there, whether it's the major differences or just the differences regarding issues of fiqh like moon sightings and beard length and wiggling the finger and the number of rakahs in Tarawih and all this kind of thing. And unfortunately it's quite saddening and also laughable as well how people generally treat these differences. Generally what happens is people look for the straw man argument rather than the steel man argument, and that's the topic for the video. The topic for the video is when you disagree with someone, or when you want to know why there's a difference of opinion on any issue, and this can apply either in Islamic issues or just across life generally, and it goes back to Husn adhann as well, thinking good of other people. Rather than assuming that everyone's really dumb and they've got it wrong, try to understand their position, and the best way of doing that is try to find someone who's educated in that position and ask them the simple question of what's the strongest argument in support of your whatever your argument is. Or even if someone's telling you we do it this way or this is the opinion, you should ask them, okay, so if it's that clear, then what's the strongest argument that the other side has to support their position? And if someone who's in a position of responsibility, whether it's an imam or a community leader or someone who's presenting themselves as educated or knowledgeable in this regard, if they can't give you some clear answers with regard to that, then it shows a lack of critical thinking. And that's something that's lacking within the Muslim community. It should be taught in schools, it should be a foundational thing. And if we can internalize this skill, we'll see that it kind of uplifts the ummah generally. Why? Because it's going to uplift and level up the discourse amongst members of the community. At present, we have a massive gap between those who are somewhat educated within anything and the vast majority of people who lack any kind of these skills, and that's what causes issues and fighting and tribalism and my sheikh's a lion and all this kind of nonsense. So just to kind of clearly illustrate the point before I go on to kind of explain the idea in more detail, say for example, yeah, it's one of these thick debates about the beard length. Okay, here's a clear example. Now if you're talking to a scholar from the Indo-Pak region who follows a certain way of thinking or school of thought, right? And a young kid, okay, not a young kid, let's say someone who's 16 or 17, he comes up to the imam or the scholar and says, there's a lot of confusion, like what's the actual opinion on having a beard? Now, if this imam doesn't understand this and he lacks critical thinking, or he's just being intellectually dishonest, the imam's going to say, all of the scholars have said this, all of the scholars have said it has to be a fist length, and that's it. So the kid's going to be thinking, because what we have to understand is we're living in the age of Google now. We're living in the age of there's a lot of opinions that people have access to, there's a lot of knowledge that people have access to. It doesn't mean they're going to apply it, but compare it to any time in Islamic history, there's more knowledge out there at people's fingertips on their phones, right? Now if the imam just says, oh well, it's supposed to be this, all the scholars say this, and then the kid says, well, why do a lot of Muslims not say that? Why do they think that it shouldn't be? Or they just say it has to be something that represents a beard but the length is variable, or they have this opinion, or what about all the Muslims that follow this school of thought? And the imam might say something like, or this speaker might say something like, oh, misguided, they just don't understand, it's clear, the hadith is clear, let the beard grow, trim the moustache, right? Now that's what you call, in this day and age, in the age of Google and in the age of confusion, that's what you call intellectual dishonesty. And it plagues the ummah, if you think about it, especially with certain imams from like the Indo-Pak region. Those who are kind of, as much as the social media scholars get a lot of criticism, one positive is they get checked more often. So they kind of factor it into their arguments. They'll kind of be more open about this kind of thing. But those who are still, a lot of the times, they still have this mentality of like, oh, they're misguided, this person is misguided, if they do 2 rakats, misguided. When really, all they need to do is just tell the kid, look, there's these differences of opinion. They're not stupid. People aren't stupid. What we've learned from the past, we've seen recently the rise of certain speakers and psychologists and the rise of certain forms of media like podcasts and long form content, that people are not as dumb as originally thought, right? There's people who are interested in kind of deep thinking, critical thinking. All it takes was for the imam to be open and say, these are the opinions, these people say this, these people say that, and the kid will be like, okay, so why do they think that? And the imam might be like, well, they interpret the hadith in this way, and some of the scholars, they said this, and the kid will be like, okay. And that's what you call trying to understand the other side's position by trying to get their best argument, right? If someone says, oh, we believe in Mawlid, or we don't believe in Mawlid, whatever the case is, yeah? And obviously this is a kind of a meta topic that I'm trying to address. It's not about the specific issues, so I'm not commenting on any kind of specific issues, or that's not my place anyway. If, for example, someone's arguing against Mawlid, right, and as if it's so clear cut, as if everything is so black and white, and you say, okay, what's the strongest argument the other side has? Come on, like, let's not be silly anymore, you know what I mean? Like, it's the age of anyone can find out the argument, so you might as well just be honest. And it's not like, if you're insecure about the position, or it has some kind of emotional attachment to you, then okay, it might affect you, but really it's only going to strengthen your position if you know the strongest argument, because then you're going to have a greater level of understanding that you can factor in. It's going to give you more persuasive power. Do you not think that if there's someone who preaches a certain opinion on a specific topic, if he understands all of the arguments from the other side, if you look at some of the polymath scholars of the past, how they addressed the concerns against Islam at the time, the prevailing concerns or the prevailing issues, they used to understand the other side's argument better than the other side. And then that gives you a kind of an unbeatable advantage in persuading people of your case, right? Now, there's no point making this video that long, obviously, you get the point. What I'm trying to say is, when there's a disagreement or when there's a topic you're trying to understand, try and get the strongest argument from the other side. Up your level of understanding and critical thinking, right? But the reason why this is a bit of like this is more of a deeper topic than you might originally think is because of the far-ranging consequences. If you look at the future generations of the kids who are going to be exposed to these ideas, a key issue is, for example, it's a Jummah khutbah at a normal masjid, right? And there's kids sitting there, and the imam or the speaker is going on about how these other people are misguided and they don't understand this and they don't understand this, and it's clear, but they just don't want to follow it. They're Muslim, but they just don't want to follow it. As in, like, that whole Husn thing's just gone out the window, right? And the kids are listening to this, and in their mind they've got these arguments that come up, but they're not being addressed. So then what happens is the kids are going to look elsewhere for these answers, and they're going to, if they go online and find a scholar or a speaker that's from a different methodology or whatever that resonates more with their line of thinking, then they're going to gravitate towards that. And then a good old Maulvi Sahib is going to be like, every Wahabi or get, every Wahabi or get. But the point is, you have to take responsibility for your flock. As in, this was part of your role. Unfortunately, if you've not trained yourself in critical thinking or perceiving what your audience is thinking, then that's not really anyone's fault apart from the leaders. A lot of the time it comes back to not being transparent. It's not about trying to hide anything. It's not like if you explain the position in a certain way and you kind of hide the main argument, that the kid, if he's not curious, he's not going to go and find out. Obviously he is. Obviously he has access to find out all of this information. Another thing that they have to understand, or the people in the Muslim community need to understand, is kids are brought up on a diet. Yeah, I know I keep saying kids. This is something that I'm quite passionate about, because this is what's going to shape our future generation, right? They're brought up on a diet of empirical thinking, or like statistics, studies, what's the results for this and what's the results. Now you can disagree with the whole methodology of Western education and how it's tailored towards tests. That's a separate matter. When the kid's sitting there listening to the khutbah, certain things aren't going to resonate with them, right? So there needs to be a way of connecting the two. For example, if the imam's going through a poem where the poet is obviously using some extreme form of like poetic license, that's only going to resonate with people if they're in this spiritual high flow state, and the kids are just listening to these verses and they're like looking at each other thinking, what? All it takes is for the speaker or the imam to preface it by saying it. Look, this is a poem, and generally how people do this, they use poetic license and all this. They're not stupid, they'll understand. But then what happens is the kids are going to be listening to these like crazy sounding verses without the context, and then they're going to be like, nah, I'm not about that life. And then it goes back to the imam saying, everybody be your game. So, quick video. It's just the idea I'm trying to plant in your heads, yeah. Obviously I've spoken about imams and stuff, there's no disrespect intended, it's just I'm trying to make the point. If you like the message, then obviously like, share and subscribe, and this will be going out as a podcast as well. And you can message me on social media with anything related to self-development and books and whatnot. Jazakumullah khairan for listening, and Assalamu alaikum.